Related to the topic of coping, I want to cover positive psychology, which is probably the newest area of psychology, and the focus here is on human flourishing. How can we help people be the best people that they can possibly be? This area came into fruition after there were some criticisms of psychology that we focus too much on negativity and not enough on positivity. We worry too much about helping people solve problems like anger or anxiety or depression, and not enough time worrying about more positive things such as joy, happiness, or life satisfaction. So these numbers reflect how many research studies exist in the psychological literature on each topic. For depression, there's over 50,000 research studies that have been occurred. For life satisfaction, though, there's only 2,500. This is a really mismatched ratio. In fact, it's for every 21 studies on something that's negative, there's one study on something that's positive. Newer psychologists have been saying, we really are only looking at one side of the coin then. Part of our job is coming up with ways to help depression or anger, but we also should be looking at the other side of the coin where we help people fulfill their life as best as possible. Positive psychology is an effort to do that. It's a study of strengths and virtues that help individuals thrive. When we talk about positive psychology, the major topic we cover is happiness. And there are a lot of definitions out there about happiness and a lot of debate about what the right definition is. But in general, I think it's clear that happiness includes positive emotion, but also positive activities. So feeling good and engaging in good work. You probably know someone in your life who is super happy all the time, no matter what goes on. And then you probably know someone who's kind of like an Eeyore, and things are just bad all the time. And you might wonder, why are they that way? It seems to be because happiness is partially genetic. So there's this theory called the set point theory that says we all have a genetic set point of happiness. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're stuck there and only there. The reason this image of the guy tethered to the ground is here is because it's like the place where he's hit the ground is his genetic set point, but he's able to move a little bit below or a little bit above it. And there are a lot of things in the environment that can shift our happiness a little bit. So this is another example of the nature versus nurture interaction. It's not the case that that Eeyore is probably going to turn into the super chipper happy person that you know, but there are things that can make him a little less happy or a little more happy. One of the reasons that this is the case and we can't turn from an Eeyore into a super chipper person is because of an idea called hedonic adaptation, also referred to sometimes as the happiness treadmill. A hedonic adaptation theory basically says we cope with positive emotions in the same way that we cope with negative emotions. So remember we talked about with negative emotions, we go into that resistance phase of when something stressful happens, and we cope, and it helps us get through. Basically, the same thing happens with positive emotions, where we might have a really high influx of positive emotions from something good that happens in our life. Maybe you do win the lottery, or you get a new car, or you find a new relationship. But then eventually, your body copes and adapts and gets used to it. One of the reasons it's called a treadmill is because it works kind of like it works at the gym, where if you haven't worked out in a very long time and you go and you get on the treadmill for a half an hour, the next day you feel really sore and tired. But if you force yourself to keep getting on the treadmill, after a couple of weeks, you don't feel sore anymore. Your body has adapted. And that's what we do with emotions as well. We adapt to extreme emotions, both positive ones and negative ones. And that pulls us back to our genetic set point. Of course, there are things, like I said, that can move your set point a little bit up or a little bit down. So I'm going to list some of what the research has to say about what can make us less happy here as the frownies, and then again, things that can make us more happy as smiley faces. So what negatively impacts happiness? One of the major things is unemployment, and this is something that we're dealing with as a culture right now because so many people have lost their jobs given the downturn in the economy. Unemployment definitely decreases a person's well-being. Lack of freedom, in particular political freedom, is also associated with less well-being. So this graph shows the percentage of happiness within a certain country on the bottom, and then up the top is the amount of freedom. And you can see a lot of different countries on here. The United States is up in the upper right-hand corner, and we're in the area where we have a lot of freedom, and we also rate ourselves as being quite happy. Other countries who have less freedom down towards the bottom oftentimes rate themselves as being less happy. Another bad thing for our happiness is commuting. Spending time in the car makes us feel less happy. One of the major reasons is we don't have control when we're in traffic and we can't move forward. And remember, we talked about how perceived control is one of the things that decreases our stress. And then loss, in particular when we're talking about loss of loved ones. We oftentimes experience less happiness during those periods of our life. Now, what can make us more happy? Well, flow. When we're in flow, we're highly engaged with what we're doing. So have you ever had the experience where you were focused at work and time just flew by and it was time to go home and you're like, wow, this day went fast? And then there's other days where you're looking at your watch like every 5 minutes, wondering, am I ever going to get to go home? The first situation, you're in flow. You're engaged in the environment. The second one, you're not. So if you're in flow more, you actually experience more well-being, because if you're constantly checking your watch, you're not really enjoying the thing that you're doing. And if you spend time doing things you're not enjoying, that negatively impacts your well-being. There's also signature strengths. Researchers have identified 24 signature strengths within the human species, and everybody has some that are at the top of their list, and they're different. So there's individual differences. My strengths are probably different than your strengths. And this is what the survey was if you did the extra credit. Researchers argue that if you're able to live in a way that utilizes your strengths, you're going to have more happiness than if you don't. So for example, if courage was one of your top strengths, maybe being a firefighter or a policeman as a job would be a good job for you. Or if you're like me and courage is not one of your strengths, then being a firefighter or a policeman would actually be scary and cause me a lot of stress. So you want to think about what your strengths are, and if you didn't do the extra credit, you can always go back and still take the survey for yourself to find out what your strengths are. Being authentic also makes us happier. Authenticity is when we act in accordance to who we actually are, and we don't behave in ways that are for other people. So this happens in college sometimes. Some of you are here because you want to be here, and some of you are here because your parents want you to be here. For those of you who are here because you want to be here, you're probably enjoying school more and putting in more effort than those of you who are being forced to be here because it's not authentic for you. There's also a theory called self-determination theory that says we need 3 things to have well-being. The first is autonomy. Autonomy is the ability to do things for ourselves. We need to have competence, the feeling that we can do things. And then relatedness, the ability to make social connections. These theorists would say that if you have all 3 of these, you're going to have higher well-being than if you don't. So think about your workplace. Do you have autonomy? Are you able to make decisions for yourself and control how you spend your time? If you are, you probably are happier with your job than if you are not. Do you feel competent, where your job is not too easy or too hard? If it's either too easy or too hard, you're probably less satisfied than if you feel like it's challenging but that it's within your ability to do. And thirdly, do you feel related to the people you work with? One of the things you hear a lot from people is that I really like the people I work with when you ask why they like their job. Or if you ask why they hate their job, the people I work with suck. So relatedness is important too. Social support, which we've already talked about. It's very important to have people whom you can have support from. And then finally, less time at work and more time in play. And notice here that this is not 0 time in work. Having something to do with your time is good because we know unemployment is not good for our well-being. But if you get past working, the 7 or 8 hour per day shift, your happiness really starts to suffer. So people who work 12 or 14 hours per day have much lower happiness scores.